Hey guys, welcome to the Way Wednesdays. Great to be with you again. I am trying a new microphone. I'm pretty excited about it. So let me know in the comments if you can hear me too much or too little. Just let me know. That's really awesome. Hey, Pastor Gary can't be with us tonight. He had some surgery. Just pray for him. He's doing well. He's doing well. Just pray that the Lord would continue to heal him and that his recovery would be quick and that he'd get back with us ASAP, right? And I also want to remind you, we're going to Israel. You are invited to come with us to Israel, April 2021. Go to thewaycongregation.com to get more information about that. I really want you to come because I'd love to meet you. So many of you guys have never met, and you seem like nice people, at least judging from your comments. Not all of you, right? But most of you. And so you're all welcome. Even the guys that don't always agree with me, you're welcome to come too. It's going to be a great time. And I hope that you can make it. We've priced it so that it's economical. I think the times are great. Going in April is such a wonderful time because it's not too hot. It's not too cold. It's just right in the land of Israel. So check that out at thewaycongregation.com. Speaking of which, this Shabbat we are having our service. We're going through the book of James. Man, it's good stuff in there. And, after spending a year and 4 months in the book of Revelation, I thought, let's do something that is not prophecy at all. And so it's really been wonderful. It's just good for the Christian walk, walking the way that Yeshua taught us. Speaking of teaching us, let's get into the word. We are in the portion today. Ooh, it's got fun stuff. Anything from Genesis 1 through Genesis 11, I think is really exciting. And I wish God had elaborated just a little bit more. But on the other hand, I'm kind of glad he didn't because we probably spend too much time in some of that stuff. But it is pretty exciting stuff. And it's super important to understand how the world got to be the way it is. And Genesis 1 through 11 really take us into that. So without any further ado, let's jump into our text. Now, we're supposed to start in verse 8. I'm gonna cheat just a little bit and go back to 6 verse 1 because it's just too much fun. Now it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterward when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. So the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing, and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. Now, it is easy for the Bible skeptic to come along and say, this Bible is a bunch of nonsense. And if this God of yours were true, he'd be a real jerk. Because you get this whole thing where God makes man. God's like, I'm done. I'm going to destroy man. Look, there's a huge amount of history behind that. Don't have time to go into it all, obviously. But as I have kind of teased you guys, I've been writing a book on these kinds of topics. Now, I wrote one some years ago, and this is part 2 to that book. And there's so much more information. It's crazy. I mean, you can just keep going down the well. That's why I say that, it's probably good that God didn't give us too much. He gave us just as much as we need, because then we can go and cross-reference other civilizations and see what they were saying about some of these very same things. And it's startling and revealing at the same time. So this is the context for the flood, is that the sons of God, angels, came down, they took women, and they created a hybrid race. And as a result of that, that the earth was corrupted. Notice what it says here. God is sorry that he's made man. And then starting in verse 8, he's going to find Noah. All right, so that's the good news. And I just want to skip down really quick. It says that for all flesh had corrupted their way in the earth. All right. So that is the situation. It's not just that people were being mean to each other. Sometimes in our kids' stories, we have that people were just being mean and they weren't getting along. And so God just decided to destroy everybody. But it was a whole lot more than that. There was like this whole genetic apocalypse that was going on. And in the last days, things will be of a similar nature when the Lord Jesus comes back. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. So many parallels. I wish I had time to get into all of them, but we don't. Okay. So then he finds Noah. But Noah, boy, that is such good news. Or in the Hebrew, it's actually and Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. He found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Why did Noah find grace in the eyes of the Lord? Well, it tells us. This is the genealogy of Noah. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations. Noah walked with God. All right, so we know that Noah is just. That's good. What does it mean that he's perfect? Now, there's a couple words for perfect. One is like shalom, right? You have meshulam, somebody that's they have arrived, right? They have now, they've got it all together. But this word here is the word tamim. The word tamim. Now, I want to be careful, all right? So sometimes we start looking in Hebrew and say, well, this is the way it is. But we have to understand that sometimes there are different options how a word can be translated. So I don't want to overstate the case, all right? So here the word tamim, it is used of sheep that are pure. Now, it's not talking about moral, right? There's no moral implication in this word when it's talking about sheep, because sheep are not moral. But they're pure. They don't have any spots or defects in them. So if that is the implication that we are to glean from this, then that would suggest that Noah was genetically pure, that he did not have any Nephilim in him. He had none of that. Is the implication that we get. Now you might say, well, this sounds far-fetched. Well, look what's going to happen in the final days. We're going to have the mark of the beast, and it says that everybody who doesn't have the seal of God is going to be pressured into taking this thing. Now, those that are on God's side and don't take it, they're going to lose their heads, right? So it's going to be an awful time on the earth. And we can't quite go back to the days of Noah. We can only look at the text and see what it says. When you start looking at the text, it was a terrible time. When you look at the book of Giants found near the Dead Sea Scrolls, then what you find there is that it talks about all this corruption that was happening on the earth. You look at the book of Enoch, it's giving us the same story as we find in the Bible. And there are other texts as well. Something that I found very interesting in ancient Mesopotamia. Now Mesopotamia is the land of Shinar. Shinar is Shnei Nerot, which means two rivers. Mesopotamia is the Greek equivalent of that. It just means between the rivers. So in the land of Shinar, that is where we find all of these ancient texts, and they talk about the flood, right? Just as easily as you and I would talk about the 4th of July, right? Like every American knows about the 4th of July, right? We don't have to say, well, you know the 4th of July when that something happened, right? Most people have even forgotten. They just know that this thing happened, right? So they talk about the flood. There was a flood. Right? If you read the Epic of Gilgamesh, it talks about the flood. It's not having to even explain, well, here's what happened by flood. Here's what I mean. None of that. Just people seem to know. They understood that there was a flood. Why? Ready? Because there was a flood, right? It's a real zinger, isn't it? They knew it because there was a flood. I mean, it's really simple. All right, I better keep going here because there is too much to talk about, and it's so much fun. But I just love this text. So Noah begot 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The earth was also corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. So God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. This is such a pivotal passage, right? All flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. All flesh. The word here is hishchit. All right, so nishchata is that it was corrupted. So it says that it was corrupted. That's really significant. That it's not that every thing that was living on the planet corrupted itself, like I'm going to go corrupt myself, but that it was corrupted is really the sense that we get there. So there's something happening. And again, this goes back to the sons of God and the bad things that they were doing. And so all of this put together made God make that hard decision. I'm going to have to wipe everything out. And that was not a fun decision on his part, not by any means, but that's what he did. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence. Now, this is also interesting. Is it the end of all flesh because he's going to destroy it in a flood? Or is it the end of all flesh because it's been corrupted? Well, that's an interesting question, and I don't necessarily have the answer. I think you could read it either way. Again, when we come to these texts, we want to be really careful that we don't go beyond what the text is saying. Does the text permit that all flesh, it's the end of all flesh because it's all corrupted? I think that's a real possibility. Is that the only reading? Probably not. All right. So again, we just have to be careful. For the earth is filled with violence, right? So he does give us the reason that it's the end, but again, is it because he's going to send the flood, or he's sending the flood because it's the end of all flesh, right? So different ways to look at that. So the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. So what is the purpose of the flood? It's to destroy all the corrupted flesh. I'll tell you, if we don't spend time in this chapter, then you can go around with this big chip on your shoulder that God is such a meanie and he doesn't like us and he just likes to destroy people. Not at all the case. It really was a preventative measure. God did it to actually ensure the race of man, right? Because if Satan and his cronies had their way, they would have transformed us through the begetting of children and the Nephilim that were on the earth in those days. They would have overtaken humanity. And the image that God created us in, his image, would have been lost and would have been replaced with Satan's image. Wow, think about that for a second, right? I mean, that is pretty crazy stuff. So as a result of that, he says to Noah, make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and outside with pitch. And this is how you shall make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits. Its width 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. You shall make a window for the ark, and you shall finish it to a cubit from above, and set the door of the ark on its side. You shall make it with lower, second, and third decks. And behold, I myself am bringing floodwaters on the earth to destroy from under heaven all flesh, which is the breath of life. Everything that is on the earth shall die. Now, we need to start counting how many times. There's a lot of times when God says everything's going to die. And I want to make this super abundantly clear that when God says that everything's going to die, what he's trying to say is everything's going to die, right? So there's like no exceptions. There's some fables that some of the giants, King Og, for example, somehow he was able to hitch a ride on the outside of the ark. No, God's like, look, everything that has breath is dying. The whole point of the flood was to wipe out the Nephilim. That was the major number one point, was to wipe out the Nephilim. So if you have some clever Nephis out there that somehow figure out a way to hitch a ride on the back of the ark, well, then they just outsmarted God, right? That doesn't make a lot of sense. So again, he said everything that has breath is going to die. The big exception, of course, is everything that's in the ark is going to make it. And the Nephilim were definitely on the outside of the ark. Now, it's also important to keep in mind here that when God gives these dimensions, these are seaworthy dimensions. Over at the Answers in Genesis, the Ark Experience, I think it's called, in Kentucky, with the Answers in Genesis Museum. You can go there. I've never gone there. I'd love to go. One of these days, I have to go there. But you can go in a life-size replica of the Ark. So I'm trying to think of the name of the guy that did all the good research. I used to have that right there. But he did some great research. Tim Lovett, there we go. All right, still there. So Tim Lovett did some phenomenal research on the Ark. He looked at all of the ancient shipbuilding methodologies, and he found that the way to make a seaworthy vessel without using nails, screws, and any kind of modern gadgets. All right, so it's pretty amazing, and I encourage people to go check that out. So it was a very seaworthy vessel. The counterpart, the Mesopotamian version that is sometimes talked about in the creation epic or in Gilgamesh, that particular boat, it was just a box. Literally, it was a box, and it was not at all seaworthy. How do we know this? Because people have tested it, right? You can put a box in in a lake or in the ocean, and it will float. That's fine. But the moment you start getting any kind of weather, it's going to sink because it's going to capsize. What needs to happen is the boat, as the waves, so if the waves are going along, right, the boat needs to be going this way so that the waves are coming, and then the boat can kind of slice through those. But if the boat is this way, then guess what? When the waves come, then the boat goes like that. It's going to capsize. So it has to be a seaworthy vessel, and the measurements that we have in there are very, very seaworthy. So that is just one more example of how we know that the Bible is legit. So he says, but I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall go into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female, of the birds after their kind, of the animals after their kind, and of every creeping thing of the earth after its kind. 2 of every kind will come to you to keep them alive. Now that is, talk about good news. If I were Noah, I'd be like, oh, whew, thank you, Lord. You're going to bring them to me, right? Because if I have to go and catch all these things, oh boy, right? Just imagine Noah trying to go and catch little mice, right? And he's trying to catch big lions. I mean, that would not have worked out too well. He's trying to round up the elephants. That would have been crazy. God brought the animals to Noah, all right? He brought the animals to Noah. Such a difference. So, very kind on God's part. And you shall take for yourself of all food that is eaten, again, so not just for you, but for the animals, right? And you shall gather it to yourself, and it shall be food for you and for them. So God thought of everything, right? Thus Noah did, according to all that God commanded him, so he did. All right. Then the Lord said to Noah, come into the ark, you and all your household, because I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. All right, wait a second. So God gives him the command to do it, and then he's getting in the ark, right? How much time transpired between when he started building and when he finished, right? It was very likely in a span of 120 years. So, God says in chapter 6, verse 3, that my spirit will not strive with man forever because he's flesh, and behold, his days are 120 years. There's been some misunderstanding about that, suggesting that God was setting the age limit for humans at that point. The only problem is that, well, Noah makes it to 950 years. His son Shem makes it to 600 years. And then we see that, I think it's Arpachshad, he makes it to 400 years, right? So guys are still living longer. Their lives are getting shorter, to be clear, but they're still living a pretty long time. And we see that Abraham makes it to 175. Jacob makes it to 147, I believe it is. So, that's hundreds of years later. So, if that really is kind of the age limit, that seems challenging in my perspective. I would suggest that it took Noah a very long time to build this ark. Look, he's got him and his 3 sons, right? That's not a lot of manpower to build a boat that was about 450 feet, right? So it's 300 cubits. If we take the most conservative estimate for the cubit, which is 18 inches, that puts it about 450 feet long. That's a huge vessel, right? And that would take even in the ancient days, if you had a team of men, say 50 to 100 men, that would take years to build. You got 4 guys that you're going to build this thing. So there was certainly a long period between the end of chapter 6 and the beginning of chapter 7. But again, we're just getting the bullet points, which is so typical in the Bible. We just get the bullet points. We don't get the whole perspective, but we just have to keep that in mind as we're reading. So then he says, you shall take with you 7 each of every clean animal. Notice that. So 7 of every clean animal, a male and his female, 2 each of animals that are unclean, a male and his female. Wait a second. Are you telling me that way back then, Noah already understood about clean and unclean animals? Boy, it sure sounds like it, doesn't it? That he understood, and God had somehow already given this explanation. But again, as is so typical, we're not told specifically. We have to infer that from the text. I think it's a very good inference that we can get from the text, because he talks about clean and unclean. So if he already knows about clean and unclean, that means that, well, at some point he must have learned about clean and unclean, right? And it was just one of those, like, well, of course, right? We understand this. We understand that there are animals that are clean and there are animals that are unclean. That's really significant, because no one is going to be eating the animals that are unclean after the flood. They're going to be eating the clean animals. And that's why you want to take a few extra when you get off that boat, so that when you go and you slaughter the lambs, like, oh, shoot, that was our only pair of lambs, that's our only pair of sheep, and I just killed them. Oh, what was I thinking, right? So God's like, you're going to take 7 of those and then 2 of the other kind, because they'll be fine. You're not going to eat those things. But of the clean animals, we want to make sure to have a lot, so that they can, of course, reproduce. You can have some food, etc. So that, of course, makes a huge difference. That'd be a real bummer if Noah ate the only pair of something. Like, oh, those were only chickens. Bummer. We would all be poor if we didn't have chicken. All right. Also 7 each of birds of the air, male and female, to keep their species alive on the face of all the earth. For after 7 more days, I will cause it to rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and I will destroy from the face of the earth all living things that I have made. And Noah did according to all that the Lord commanded him. Noah was 600 years old when the floodwaters were on the earth. So Noah, with his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives, went into the ark because of the waters of the flood, of clean animals, of animals that are unclean, and of everything that creeps on the earth. 2 by 2, they went into the ark to Noah. Again, God put it into the hearts of these animals to come to Noah. He did not have to go round them up, male and female, as God had commanded Noah. And it came to pass after 7 days that the waters of the flood were on the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were open. Let's think about this for just a second. When you go into a court of law, you've got to state your name. You've got to be specific about the details. Tell me where you were on the night of the 13th, right, at 8:05 p.m. Well, let me think. Okay, that night I was at home watching a movie. So you have to be very specific. And God is giving us the receipts, right? This thing really happened. He's giving us the receipts that this happened. This is not just something that was made up. And like I said, it was common knowledge in the ancient world. Nobody was going around trying to prove the flood. It was just like everybody knew about the flood. And they're like, well, why are you trying to prove that, right? We already know that to be the case. So why are you talking about it? It only became a legend and a myth much, much, much later. I mean, much later, thousands of years later, did the general belief that the flood happened, did that start to wane, and it became something of legend and myth. And now people think it's a fantasy and a fairy tale. But ancient history tells us otherwise, that this really did happen. All right, so he goes on that the windows of the heaven were open and the fountains of the great deep were broken open. Okay, I keep my trusty globe here, which does not always make some people happy, people that think the earth is a different shape, but that's okay. So I'm glad I have it here. It's really handy. Where is that Atlantic Ocean? Let's see if I can find this. Okay, so we've got the Atlantic Ocean. This is called the Transatlantic Rift. All right, we can see that there's like kind of like the seam on a baseball. This one, it's too bad it's not a relief globe, but it shows us that probably that's how it opened. There's trying to think of the guy. Yeah, Dr. So-and-so. He wrote an excellent book talking about the Genesis flood, and I think he makes an excellent case that there was water underneath the earth, that it was underneath the tectonic plates, and that the plates were essentially sitting on these huge aquifers, and then it popped open, and then all that water was under tremendous pressure. And it then, as the land on it was pushing down, guess where the water was going? It was going up. And, can you imagine that much pressure? We know what pressurized water can do. We know pressurized water can cut through steel. We know that pressurized water can be pushed a very, very long way. So his theory is that there was so much water that it got pushed up into the ionosphere and perhaps beyond. That could be, and I'm just saying could, it could be the mechanism by which we have things like comets, etc. Maybe, okay, maybe. Dr. Walt Brown is his name. Given enough time, the name comes to me. Dr. Walt Brown, the Genesis flood, I think it's called. It's back here somewhere, but it really is an excellent book, and I think he makes an excellent case for that. So where did all the water come from? If it rained 40 days, that would not be enough. Here's something to think about. It may not have been that suddenly just a bunch of storm clouds came up, but when the fountains of the great deep broke open, that there was so much water underneath that it continued to push it up until it went up into the ionosphere. And then guess what? It came down. Right? When everything that goes up must come down unless it can break free from Earth's orbit. Perhaps some of it did, but a lot of it did not. And it came back down in the form of rain, or it may have come back in the form of ice. We know about the woolly mammoths, that they were, eating their meal, and then they were flash frozen, right? They're just like, boom, suddenly frozen. How does that happen? How does that happen? Well, I think Dr. Walt Brown makes an excellent case that if you have the water underneath he doesn't call them tectonic plates, he calls them something. But basically the landmass was sitting on all of this water, then pushed it down. That water went up it got super cold, came down as just way below zero, and instantly froze the mammoth. So again, I really do appreciate his work on that. So yeah, check it out. So, and the rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. So as the water was going up, it started coming back down, and then it came back down for 40 days. On the very same day, Noah and Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Noah's wife and the 3 wives of his sons with them entered the ark, they and every beast after its kind, all cattle after their kind, every creeping thing that creeps on the earth after its kind, and every bird after its kind, every bird of every sort. And they went into the ark to Noah 2 by 2 of all flesh, in which is the breath of life. So those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. Now the flood was on the earth 40 days. The waters increased and lifted up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters prevailed and greatly increased on the earth, and the ark moved about on the surface of the waters. And the waters prevailed exceedingly on the earth, and all the high hills under the whole heaven were covered. Okay, so this is one of those times when I say the word all in Hebrew means all, right? Big surprise there. But you might be surprised how many people don't think that it really means that. So this, of course, raises a huge debate. Was the flood local or was it global? I'm going to go with global, all right? I'm going to go with global. Now, let's go back to our trusty globe. So glad I have this thing here. So all this blue stuff, most of this blue stuff was not there before the flood. So probably what you had is landmass, obviously, and you had pockets of water, right? So I grew up in Michigan, right here, and we have those little things called the Great Lakes, right? Those are huge. When you're on those and you're looking at them, they feel like the ocean, right? So I would suspect and suggest that before the flood, you had a lot of Great Lakes, fresh water, obviously, and they were pocketed all around the world. But there was still more land than there was water. And the water came because it was underneath the plates. So I think, well, check out Walt Brown's book. He does an excellent job. So everything was covered. So you cannot have, the water is not going to stop. It's like, wait, we're now at the border of Israel and we can't have the water going any further. There's a hilarious meme by Answers in Genesis where they have the ark, right? It's on, of course, the water. And then there's just like this wall of water, right? The wall of water, just it's, hundreds of feet down, maybe thousands. And the joke is, this is what a local flood would look like, right? Because the water had to be so high that it was covering everything. Every high hill was covered. So God makes it really clear that everything under heaven, right? Not only on the face of the earth, but everything under heaven was covered. He's really trying to tell us something, that this was a global, universal, worldwide, everything kind of flood. It says the waters prevailed 15 cubits upward and the mountains were covered. Wow. Once again. So again, we take roughly 18 inches times 15. That gives us what? It's about, I don't know, 20, 25 feet above the highest mountain is, so 25 feet above the highest mountain roughly is how high the water went. So there was no place to hide for the people. And check my math there. But that's also interesting because the Nephilim were there in those days, and they were pretty tall. According to according to some estimates, the records of how tall Gilgamesh was, they said he was 11 cubits tall. I did the math on that. That would make him 18 feet. So 18 feet tall is awfully big. I don't know if he was the tallest. He was, of course, after the flood instead of before, but it's a pretty tall guy. So it's still taller than him, and they probably couldn't tread water for not long enough. I know that for sure. So, and then God says, all flesh All flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, cattle, beasts, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, and every man, all in whose nostrils was the breath of the spirit of life. All that was on the dry land died. So he destroyed all living things which were on the face of the ground, both man and cattle, creeping thing, and bird of the air. They were destroyed from the earth. Only Noah and those who were with him in the ark remained alive, and the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. I am starting to see a trend. I get the feeling that God's trying to tell us that he killed everything. Not only the stuff that was in the land of Israel, not only in the Middle East, not only in the greater Asia area, right? Not only in Europe and Asia, not just Asia, Europe, and, somewhere else, but everything. And of course, those didn't exist back then, but everything that was under the heavens was destroyed. If you had breath in your lungs, you're dead, right? So if you were not on the ark, you're dead. That's the point. This is not a local thing. So there's so much evidence for the local flood. I got to know a guy named Steve Austin. He's a geologist, and he did some phenomenal work on the St. Helens, Mount St. Helens eruption back in 1982, something like that. So it's kind of like it's on the magnitude of like a little Grand Canyon, and it creates for a wonderful study. So check out his work on the Mount St. Helens flood that happened. Why was there a flood? Because there was snow up on top of the mountain. It all got liquefied when the volcano erupted, and so then you had this huge flow of slurry that just came down, and it created a mini Grand Canyon, about 1/40th the size of the Grand Canyon. You can see the layers of sedimentation that are in there, and we know how long it took for this thing to happen. It took some days for this canyon to be created, not thousands, not even millions. Let alone thousands, but it was not millions, and it wasn't billions of years that it took for this canyon to happen. So there's a tremendous amount of evidence. All right, let's get to chapter 8. We might even get through this whole thing, maybe. Then God remembered Noah and every living thing and all the animals that were with him on the ark. And God made a wind to pass over the earth, and the water subsided. The fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were also stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained, and the waters receded continually from the earth. At the end of the 150 days, the waters decreased. Then the ark rested in the 7th month, the 17th day of the month, in the mountains of Ararat. And the waters decreased continually until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the first day of the month, the tops of the mountains were seen. So it came to pass at the end of 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made. Then he sent out a raven which kept going to and fro until the waters had dried up from the earth. He also sent out from himself a dove to see if the waters had receded from the face of the ground. But the dove found no resting place for the sole of her foot, and she returned into the ark to him, for the waters were on the face of the whole earth. So he put out his hand and took her and drew her into the ark to himself. All right, I'm going to stop there for just a second. So much to talk about and so little time. So one thing that could be happening, of course, when it says the waters are on the face of the earth, yes, there's definitely still water that's out there, but there quite likely could be a lot of fog. That's a real possibility. So maybe visibility was very poor. He just really couldn't see what was out there, and he didn't want to open the big door until he could really know what was out there. I spent some time on Lake Michigan when I was a kid, and when the fog comes in, when you cannot see anything, and you're just like, I can't even see the water. The fog is so thick. So, that's a real possibility. The other thing is, where did all the water go? Well, get my trusty globe again. The water from the flood is right here. Okay. This is the water that was from the flood. Before the flood, the water was underneath the ground. And then after, it all stayed here. Something happened. In the Psalms, it says that the the mountains went up and the valleys went down. So yes, there were mountains before the flood, but there were even bigger mountains after the flood. So Mount St. Helens, you have, pick your favorite mountain, the Rocky Mountains. Okay. These did not exist as we know them today. They did not exist as we know them today. The Himalayas did not exist as we know them today. They were a lot smaller. I don't know how much smaller, but a lot smaller. So that, as the scripture says, the mountains went up and the valleys went down. So when the valleys went down, guess what happened? All the water went down, right? It makes a lot of sense. And so that is how it started to recede from the land. I believe, I'm firmly convinced, that the Grand Canyon was created sometime either immediately after the flood or perhaps, a few years, even some decades. But you had a huge amount of water that was trapped somewhere to the east, of course. And then basically, some people think it was some kind of an ice dam. I think that's a pretty good possibility. And then eventually that ice dam broke and it just released this torrent of water, and it just came flooding down, and it carved out that Grand Canyon in a short time, not a long time. So I just love the scientific evidence that goes behind this. And if we'll just put aside our bias for a little bit, we'll find that there's some really amazing answers to the question of the flood. So then he waited another 7 days. Then the dove came to him in the evening, and behold, a freshly plucked olive leaf was in her mouth. And Noah knew that the waters had receded from the earth. Of course, he sent a dove, because these are homing pigeons, right? They like to come back. So he's like, I need to send out a bird that's going to come back to me and kind of give me a report. And so here the pigeon did that. And he waited yet another 7 days and sent out the dove, which did not return again to him anymore. And it came to pass in the 601st year, in the first month, the first day of the month, that the waters were dried up from the earth, and Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and indeed the surface of the ground was dry. And in the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dried. Then God spoke to Noah, saying, Go out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing of all flesh that is with you, birds and cattle and every creeping thing that creeps on the ground, so that they may abound on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. So Noah went out, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him. Every animal, every creeping thing, every bird that creeps, and whatever creeps on the earth, according to the families, went out of the ark. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and took of every clean animal and of every clean bird, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And the Lord smelled a soothing aroma. Then the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground for man's sake, although the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, nor will I again destroy every living thing as I have done, while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, and day and night shall not cease. So this is an amazing promise that God will never again send a flood to destroy the earth. Now, the next time that he destroys the earth, it's going to be through fire. And that's going to happen when Jesus comes back. When the veil between heaven and earth departs, then Jesus comes down in his fiery flames, and it's going to consume the earth. It's not going to utterly destroy it. It's not going to blow it up. But the earth is going to be, shall we say, tested by fire. It's going to be baptized by fire. Just like the earth was baptized by water, next time it's going to be baptized by fire. Guys, there's so much in the text. I wish I had more time to dig a bit deeper, but I really want to get through. This is a lot of fun, just getting through some of the highlights. Amazing stuff. So God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be on every beast of the earth and on every bird of the air, on all that move on the earth, and on all the fish of the sea. They are given into your hand. So the implication here, what we can infer from the text, is that there was not a fear and a dread on every beast from man before the flood. We don't know exactly what that situation was like, but think about it. You go from a perfect Edenic, I mean, in every sense of the word, Eden, when Adam and the animals were there, and they were in great harmony. They were hanging out and they were happy. And then sin enters into the world. Well, some of them would have changed because then their diet is going to change. They become hungry. They're, a bit restless. But things are still pretty good, all in all, on the earth. And so the animals are probably still mostly happy, shall we say. And then as things go from okay to then worse, certainly after the flood, things get a lot worse. Some people ask, why did they start living shorter lives after that? A theory that I've heard put forward by Dr. John Baumgartner, who is a geologist, he suggests, he's a creation science geologist, excuse me. He suggests that there was a lot of volcanic activity after the flood. So he says that when a volcano erupts, it actually has more radioactive fallout than a nuclear bomb, which is kind of amazing to think about. So the entire world got nuked, basically. And all of that radiation would, of course, gone into our cells, and it would have made us mutants. And here we are, all mutant, all of us. And so then you start having greater and greater mutations, so that the lifespan of humanity goes down quite quickly until we finally get to sort of that median of 70, 80, 90, 100. People don't really go beyond 100 for the most part. There's a few exceptions, but most of us kicked the bucket before that. So that's where we are. And he says, every moving thing that lives shall be, every living thing that lives shall be food for you. I have given you all things, even as the green herbs, but you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is its blood. Surely for your lifeblood I will demand a reckoning. From the hand of every beast I will require it, and from the hand of man, from the hand of every man's brother, I will require the life of man. All right, so what's he saying here? Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. I've given you all things, even as the green herbs. I think this is really the key in understanding what he's talking about. So here, this word keyerek esev. So we have herbage, green plants. Well, think about it. There's clearly some things that man does not eat. God is saying, just as I gave you green herbs, so too you can eat things that move, right? So now you can eat animals. And I think the reason that he says every living thing that moves shall be for food, because he's giving a very broad overview at this point. He's not nitpicking exactly, but he's giving a broad sense, because we know that things like locusts are actually kosher. Now, I don't really want to find out, but if I were in a pinch, I suppose I might eat some grasshoppers just to stay alive. But I hope I don't ever have to find that out for myself. But they are considered to be clean animals. And so God's like, you can eat those too. And I think what's happening is he's including those little creepy crawlies, some of them, not all of them, but some of them that are kosher or clean. He's including those in that designation, because we already saw that he made a very, very clear distinction between clean and unclean. So it would be very backwards for God to say, oh, by the way, you can eat the unclean now, when he had already made a distinction between the clean and the unclean. And besides, if he had told Noah this right away, Noah might have gone and found that one species that maybe that's what happened to the dinosaurs, right? Maybe they had a barbecue and they're like, oh no, those are the only two. And we just killed one of them. Bummer, right? So again, he's already made a distinction. He's already made it clear that there are clean and unclean animals. But in this designation, he's talking about there are some creepy crawlies, there are some birds, etc. That you can eat. There's some birds you cannot eat. And but he's not making that case. He's just saying now you can eat animals. Before you, presumably, as far as we can tell, they were not eating animals. I believe that's really true, that they were not eating animals before the flood. And so now God is saying that you're allowed to eat animals, but with one big stipulation: don't eat the blood, because the life is in the blood. And if anybody spills blood, God is going to demand that. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed, for in the image of God he made man. And as for you, be fruitful and multiply, bring forth abundantly in the earth and multiply in it. All right, I want to talk about something called the Noahide laws. There was a really stupid scare that was going around, I don't know, a year or two ago. Some Bible teachers, I'm not going to say who, it doesn't matter, but they were telling people the sky was falling. And they were saying that, oh, the Noahide laws, these are so terrible. Now, if you've never heard of the Noahide laws, essentially the rabbis are reading along. They're like, wait a second, God's given us all these wonderful laws. We want to keep them, but what about the non-Jew? What is the non-Jew? Someone who is the son of Noah, which includes everybody. If you're a son of Noah, what are the basic expectations for you? What does God have for you as a very minimum to live by? And so they call these the Noahide laws. They're right here in front of us. Let's go and take a look at these so-called Noahide laws. And again, as I said, people were making really a big deal out of nothing. And it kind of got me upset, because then they were saying the Jews are going to kill everybody and all that stuff. And it's just stupid. So first of all, don't eat the blood. So that's one. Don't eat blood. If you murder, guess what? It's going to be required of you. Another, be fruitful and multiply. In other words, do not commit some kind of sexual perversions, right? So these are just some of the Noahide laws. There are 7 of them. I'd have to dig them out and kind of brush up on exactly what those 7 are. But they're included right here. And there's nothing really mysterious about them. They deduce a few more from this, be fruitful. So, there's some sexual purity laws as well that are in there. One of them, which I think is a great law, make sure to kill your food before you eat it. Okay. Don't take a lamb or a sheep and, cut off its leg and start eating the thing while the lamb is still bleeding out. You're like, who would ever do that? Apparently people have done it, because if the animal is still alive, then the rest of the meat is going to be fresh, and I'll eat that tomorrow, right? I'll have this lamb chop today, and I'll have that lamb chop tomorrow. God's like, no, you got to kill that. So that's one of the Noahide laws, is that make sure you kill your food before you eat it. I think that's an excellent law. I think we should all live by that. So if you've heard of the whole Noahide law thing, where these teachers were trying to get people all shaken up about nothing, it really was much ado about nothing. And actually, just let it go. Don't even go there. Don't dig that up. It's not worth it, because in my opinion, it was a real waste of time. All right, let's move on. So then God spoke to Noah and to his sons with him, saying, and as for me, behold, I establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the cattle, and every beast of the earth, with you of all that go out of the ark, every beast of the earth. Thus I establish my covenant with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood. Never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, this is the sign of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations. I set my rainbow in the cloud, and it shall be for the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. All right, so he says, et kashti natati be'anan. So he says, I put my bow in the clouds here. So we're translating this as rainbow, but really the word there is bow. And so a keshet can be something that a hunter hunts with, right? That's a bow and arrow. That's the idea. So there is some really cool imagery that's happening here in the text. But what God did was certainly, it was warlike, right? He killed the entire planet. He was at war with the Nephilim. He was at war with the sons of God and for the bad things that they did. So he's like, look, I'm putting my bow up here. I'm not going to use it again. And it's going to be a perpetual sign that I will never again flood the earth. It's good news. Now, one more reason that it cannot be a local flood is we have local floods. Think about it. If we have local floods and the flood of Noah was simply a local flood, then guess what? God has not kept his word. But if it was a universal global flood, then God has kept his word, because he said he would never, ever flood the entire world again. And so that is certainly another important point to show there. He says, it shall be that when I bring a cloud over the earth, that the rainbow shall be seen in the cloud. And I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. The waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. The rainbow shall be in the cloud, and I will look on it to remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. And God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant which I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. Now the sons of Noah who went out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Ham was the father of Canaan. These three were the sons of Noah. And from these the whole earth was populated. And Noah began to be a farmer, and he planted a vineyard. Then he drank of the wine and was drunk and became uncovered in his tent. All right, so obviously some time has gone by. It takes time to plant a vineyard and then to get enough so that you can actually have wine, right? So this is, I don't know how many years that takes, at least 10, I would suppose. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. All right, this is a real big one. What in the world does this mean? All right, so when I was growing up, I thought maybe, Canaan saw, or Ham saw his dad naked. He saw him in the shower, right? Something like that. That's not what it's talking about, right? That's very much the G-rated version of this story. Sadly, this is not a pretty story. And if you do have little ones, you might want to cover their ears right now, because this is definitely a PG, well, this is a rated R type of part in the Bible. What it means here is to see his father's nakedness is that he had relations with Noah's wife. So that's not a very good thing. And we know that this is almost certainly, absolutely the case, because look what happens later. But Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it on both their shoulders, and went backward and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned away, and they did not see their father's nakedness. So probably not talking about seeing dad naked, but seeing dad's wife naked. That's probably the case. So Noah woke from his wine and knew what his younger son had done to him. Now, did he just see him naked, or did he see his wife naked? And even more, not just did he see her, but he did something. He did something. Then he said, cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants he shall be to his brethren. And he said, blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth, and may he dwell in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant. And Noah lived after the flood 350 years, so all the days of Noah were 950, and he died. All right, wow, what in the world is going on? Sad to say, but it looks like Ham had relations with Noah's wife, with his mother. Bad thing. This would explain why Canaan is cursed. Because where did Canaan come from? Well, you have relations and babies are often made. And so it seems here that with his own mother, he had relations, and he begot a child through her whose name was Canaan. And that is why Noah says he's going to be cursed, right? Of course he's going to be cursed, right? Because we know in Deuteronomy 28, any man that uncovers the nakedness of his father is cursed. meaning that if you have relations with your father's wife, whether it's your own mother or if it is maybe his second wife or something, it doesn't matter. You're still cursed for that. And because Ham did this, he's absolutely cursed. We know another guy that tried this, and that was Reuben. Remember that Reuben went into his father's couch, as it says. And so Reuben was cursed as a result of that. We know that Absalom did this as well. He went and took King David's concubines, not quite as gross as what Ham did, but he took his father's concubines. Why would they do this? It was not for pleasure that this was happening. This was for primacy, because what Ham was trying to say is, now I'm in charge, right? I'm going to be the number one guy here. I am the guy calling the shots. I'm going to be in charge of the women folk. And it was terrible what he did. No, but Noah was drunk. Noah couldn't know what was happening. And then Ham saw his chance and he went for it. And he had a child from him. And that child, Canaan, will go on to have a very nasty little boy that we know as Nimrod. Let's check that out. Now, this is the genealogy of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japhet, and sons were born to them after the flood. The sons of Japhet were Gomer, Magog, Madai, Yavan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras. The sons of Gomer were Ashkenaz, Rifat, Togarma. The sons of Yavan were Elisha. Yavan, by the way, means Greece, just so you guys know that. If I can think of any other names here. Of course, we recognize Magog. We know that Gog is going to come from the land of Magog. Anyway, so the sons of Yavan were Elisha, Tarshish, which is probably the Spain area, Spain, England, Kittim, and Dodanim. From these, the coastland peoples of the Gentiles were separated into their lands, everyone according to his language, according to their families, into their nations. So when it says according to their language, well, we haven't gotten to that part of the story yet. When you're telling a story, you kind of have to start and just talk about this section of it, right? So we're going to talk about the confusion of languages in the next chapter, because that is where he talks about it. But we know that these are parallel passages, but they're just dealing with, one's dealing with here's what happened here, and the other one's dealing with this over here. So chapter 10 is what we call the Table of Nations. And in chapter 11, we'll talk about the naughty things that happen there in the land. All right, so the sons of Ham were Cush, Mitzrayim, Put, and Canaan. The sons of Cush were Sheba, Havilah, Sabta, Rama, and Sabtecha. And the sons of Rama were Sheba and Dedan. Here we go. Cush begot Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one on the earth. Okay, so let's go back here. The sons of Cush, or Ham, were Cush, Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim is Egypt. Put is, let's see, Put is not Libya, by the way. Put is Put, which is Somalia, and Canaan. Of course, we know where Canaan is. The sons of Cush were Seba, Havilah, Sabta, etc. And then he says he begot Nimrod. Well, Nimrod was a bad guy. Nimrod is not his name. Trust me, he was not born with the name Let's Rebel. But that's what his name means, Let's Rebel. He was not born with that kind of name. That is an epithet or a title that was given to him. His name was intentionally distorted by the Bible so that he would be known as the rebel. We know this individual from Mesopotamia. His name is Ninurta, which is a very ostentatious kind of title, which means Lord of the Earth. Ninurta, Urta meaning earth, Nin meaning Lord. So Ninurta becomes Nimrod. You can hear the same letters are in there. It's all in my new book that's coming, just so you know. And it says that he began to be a mighty one on the earth. Wow, what does that mean? It says, Hu hechel lichiyot gibor ba'aretz. He started to be a gibor. Now, a gibor, if we go back to Genesis chapter 6, which I'm not going to do right now for the sake of time, but it says that the Nephilim were on the earth in those days. These were the mighty men of old, the men of renown. So the mighty men is the word giborim, right? So the giborim or gibor is singular. So he's of that same quality. If you look at this in the Septuagint, it's the word gigas. Gigas means that he's a giant. He's a hybrid. He began to be a hybrid on the earth. So he began to be. He didn't start as a hybrid. Remember, back in the days of Noah, the sons of God saw the daughters of men, and they took any that they chose, and they had children from them. Whereas here, something different happened. Nimrod did not start out as a Nephilim, but he became a Nephilim. So he was born, and then he became a Nephilim. How did he become a Nephilim? Well, Satan gave a command to the angels to come down on Mount Hermon. I have the receipts for this. I want you to know that. I've got all the receipts. It's in my book. It's way too much. When I say receipts, I mean just evidence. But I've got shoe boxes of evidence that is proving all this. Quite exciting. But we know that there's an inscription on top of Mount Hermon that talks about how Satan gave the command for them to come down, and then they went out and they took an oath when they did this, and that's where Hermon gets its name. It's Hermon. So all of this is kind of in this little verse right here, right? And there's just so much. It's crazy. So much is in this verse, and he began to be, and it says that he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. If you look at the epithets or the qualities, the characteristics of Ninurta, he was a mighty one, he was a hunter, etc. He was, of course, out of the same area that Nimrod was from. So Nimrod began to be a mighty hunter. It's not that Nimrod was just a good shot with a bow and arrow, right? That God was like, oh, that guy can really shoot. No, he was doing something heinous that he should not. He was defiant before God. And it says in the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. Now we're going to get to that in chapter 11, where it talks about the confusion of languages, of course. It talks about the Tower of Babel and how the people were up to no good. And it's almost certain that Nimrod, Mr. Let's Rebel, was the inspiration for that. So if you have a name like Let's Rebel, that clearly suggests that he's telling people, hey, let's rebel, right? So his very epithet, as given by the Bible, again, it's an intentional, deliberate distortion of his Mesopotamian name, which was Ninurta. The Bible saying, yeah, we know about that guy. We know what he was called, but we're not going to call him that because he was a rebel. And he was inciting people to rebel. That's what he was doing. And that the big rebellion, the Tower of Babel, that is the huge rebellion that he is responsible for. And it says that this was in the land of Shinar. Again, Shinar is from Shnei Nerot, which means two rivers. You Hebrew people out there, you say the Na'al, right? So Na'al, from Ne'arot, Na'al, it's from the two rivers. Again, I have the quotes and all the evidence if you want to see that later. From that land, he went to Assyria and built Nineveh, Rehovot, Ir, Calah, and Rezin between Nineveh and Calah. That is the principal city. Mitzrayim begot Ludim, Ananim, Lehabim, and Naphtuchim, Paturtim, and Kasluchim, from whom came the Philistines and Kaphtorim. Canaan begot Sidon, his firstborn, and Chet, and the Jebusite, the Amorite, and the Girgashite, the Hivite, the Archite, and the Sinite. Now, all of these kids, let's see, the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites, and the Girgashites, and the Hivites. All right, so these, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm missing a couple. Sorry, I'm missing some. Anyway, these, of course, the Canaanites, but the 7 nations they were considered anathema, right? God said to destroy them, just as Noah had said that they would be cursed. And so indeed they were. The Arvadite, interesting, comes from the word Arvada, right? So Arvad. I live in the city of Arvada. So that's kind of a fun fact for you. All right, the Zemarite and the Hamathite. Afterward, the families of the Canaanites were dispersed. And the border of the Canaanites was from Sidon as you go toward Gerar, as far as Gaza, then you go towards Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, as far as Lasha. These were the sons of Ham according to their families, according to the languages of the lands and the nations, and the children were born to them, Shem, the father of all the children of Eber, etc., etc., etc. I'm going to kind of skip down here just for the sake of time. To Eber were born 2 sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Yoktan. So Peleg means to divide. So what exactly was happening? I'm supposing that the division that's happening here is the division of languages, that the world, not so much the terrestrial earth, it wasn't that the continents were divided, but that you have a division of people that's happening, probably as a result of the confusion of languages, etc. And so, of course, he says the nations were divided after the flood, etc. So then in chapter 11, we will get through at least the part of the Temple of Tower of Babel. Now, the whole land had one language and one speech. This is also in the ancient record of Mesopotamia. They understood that there was one language. They talk about this, right? This is not something that the Bible concocted. There was just one language back then. No, this is on the books that people understood this. Not even on the books. Before the books were written, they understood that at one time there was one language. Pretty cool. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Then they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They had brick for stone and they had asphalt for mortar. And they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language. And this is what they begin to do. Now, nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. This is an incredibly huge statement. God is saying that, people can do anything, especially when they have one language. They can do anything. Now, we see in other places where Jesus talks about, according to your faith, let it be done to you. Woman, you're healed because of your faith. So there's definitely something about having faith. It's not the power of the faith, but it's the faith in God and that nothing is impossible. So it can go both ways. It can be good. It can also be bad, right? And of course, in this case, it was used for evil. So this declaration that God made that there's nothing that people can't do, it's a great thing as long as people are using it for good. But they weren't. They were using it for evil. So God says, okay, this is bad. Why? Now, why is it bad? What's wrong with building towers? Well, let's just go a little bit further, and I think we're going to see why it's bad. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore, its name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. Now, a lot of people think that Babel means confusion. It does not. It does not. And I will prove this here. So you have Bavel. This is the word Bavel. And this is the word confused, right? So Balal. So Balal means to confuse. So what does Babel mean? Babel does not mean confused. Now, it took on the connotation of confusion. Think about Chernobyl. Chernobyl is a city in Ukraine. What do you think about when you think of Chernobyl? You think nuclear disaster, right? That's what I think, right? When I hear the word Fukushima, I'm like, ooh, another nuclear disaster, right? Don't want that. So when I think Pearl Harbor, I think, well, what the Japanese did, December 7th, right? These places take on a secondary meaning because of the thing that happened there. So Babel becomes known as confusion because there is where the languages were confused. But the word itself does not mean confusion. So if we go back to Akkadian, which is a very close cousin to Hebrew, we have Bab and we have El. So Bab Ilu, right? You have the gate of the gods, the gate of the gods. So Babel, which was started by Mr. Let's Rebel, is the place where they were making a gate for the gods. Now, the Bible doesn't come right out and say that, but if you understand Hebrew and you do a little bit of digging, you can find these things without too much difficulty, that this is the reason. It's not just that they were making a cool tower, gods against towers, you know. He's not against towers. He's okay with towers, but it was their motivation for building the tower. They thought, they believed, and I think they were building a gate for the gods. In fact, when we look at all of the Mesopotamian Babylonian literature that talks about the city of Babel and the ziggurats that they built, this thing that they were building was a ziggurat. All right, that's what we call it. It's a stepped pyramid. And I'm actually talking about this in my book, that I believe we have the actual place of the Tower of Babel. Nebuchadnezzar talks about how he was helping to rebuild this place, and somehow it was destroyed 42 ages previously. People had just abandoned it, and now he is helping to rebuild it. He got his sons involved and all this stuff. So his dad pitched in, and he pitched in, and so they were trying to rebuild this thing. He says it was built many ages before them. So interesting, and it was just abandoned. So we have so much of the archaeology, we have the documents, all the stuff that really fills out this bigger picture. The Bible is just giving us the cliff note. The Bible is giving us here's what you need to know stuff. From God's perspective, it was bad, and and God came down, and he intentionally, he personally stopped it. He came down, he confused the languages. Again, that's also in the ancient record outside of the Bible, that man spoke one language and it was confused. So that gets us through. Wow, we did an entire portion. I just can't even believe it. It's so cool. I'm going to just take a quick look, you guys, through your questions, because I saw that you guys are writing things and I just didn't have time to get into all that you were saying. Let's see here. Just looking for if there are any questions. Yeah, Dr. Heiser has a great podcast, Naked Bible. Absolutely. Check out his stuff. He's really good. And I've had him on the show a couple times. I always love having him on there. It's a lot of fun. Just looking to see if there are any quick questions that I could answer for you guys. Looks like, oh, here's one. All right. This is from Shemin. According to pagan culture, was Gilgamesh found at his birth in a basket on the river, just like Moshe was? No, I think that was Sargon. I think that was Sargon the First, that there was a myth about him. I don't think it was Gilgamesh. I'm pretty sure it was not Gilgamesh. But thank you for asking that. All right. And yes, Gator Bader, Dr. Walt Brown's hydroplate theory. Thank you. 1986. Absolutely. All right. And let's see here. Just want to see if there's any other quick questions. I love the chit chat. It's great. But since there's no more questions, hey, we did it. Awesome. Thank you guys for joining me here. Keep Pastor Gary in prayer. One question just came up. Was the one language Hebrew? We don't know. We really just don't know. Sumerian seems to be the oldest language as far as we can tell. But that's, of course, after God scattered them all. So, or, confused them all. So I don't know. I think Hebrew or a Semitic language is a pretty good option. But I wouldn't die on that hill. So awesome. Thank you, guys. Always a pleasure to be with you. Hope you'll come to Israel with us. If you're in the area, come hang out with us during Shabbat. We always have a great time. We're in Lakewood, Colorado. And thank you for your contributions. Thank you for helping us keep doing God's work. Much appreciated.